economist based in London, and I will be the moderator of the discussion today. We'll cover 3 topics. We'll talk about the concept and the benefits of the demographic dividend for families, societies, and countries. We'll talk about the key areas where investment is needed, with a special focus on family planning, sexual and reproductive health and rights, as well as youth empowerment. And we hope that you'll come away from this discussion with a better understanding of the role that different organizations play in this area. During the discussion, you can submit your comments and questions for our panelists on the EDD app, which I hope you have all downloaded. We'll have 2 Q&A sessions in which I will take questions from the floor, as well as some of the questions that have been submitted through the app. They'll be shown to me here on the stage. And to submit your questions, please remember to specify in the app the location of this session. We are in auditorium A1, so anytime you use the app today, just specify auditorium A1. I'd like to start with just a short notice. As some of you may have heard, the Executive Director of UNFPA, Dr. Babatunde Oshotimeni, passed away unexpectedly earlier this week. For this reason, as I'm sure you understand, one of our original panelists, Mr. Benoit Kalasa, the director of UNFPA's technical division, was unable to travel. He had to stay back in New York. Instead, we have someone else from UNFPA joining us today, Ms. Sitske Steneker. Our other panelists today include Mr. Matthias Lundberg from the World Bank. With us today, we also have Augustine Mahiga, who is the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Tanzania. We have Esinam Amuzo, who is a youth activist from Ghana. She's one of our EDD young leaders at this conference. And we also have Jackson Chikweko, who is from Reproductive Health Uganda, an NGO affiliated with the International Planned Parenthood Federation. Later on, we'll be joined by Alexander De Croo, the Deputy Minister of Belgium. He's running a bit late, but he will join us about 20 minutes into the session. First, I'd like to show you a short video. Can we see the video, please? It illustrates the problem we'll be talking about today.
Here in the Sahel, 1 in 2 people live on less than $1.25 per day. There are over 11 million people living under the threat of hunger, and 5 million under 5 children suffer from acute malnutrition. Education attainment remains low, especially for girls. Early marriage and pregnancy are among the most frequent in the world. Maternal and neonatal mortality rates remain high. The Sahel region tops the world fertility rate with 6 to 7 children per woman. 3 out of 5 inhabitants are below the age of 25. This means that the dependent people by far outnumber the working age population. But the Sahel is not a wasteland in the middle of nowhere. In fact, it is located in Africa. And the Sahel could tap into its demographics and unlock powerful demographic dividends. The time to act is now.
Ensuring that all children, especially girls, spend the longest possible time at school and that early marriage does not endanger the lives of young girls and their children.
The time to act is now.
This call to action on women's empowerment and demographics is not simply about numbers. It is about people.
The time to act is now.
We know that educating adolescent girls and getting health services to women will lead to greater prosperity, not just for individual families, but also for entire economies.
The time to act is now.
Investing in young people and enabling them to exercise their human rights not only benefits young people themselves, but can also help their countries reap a demographic dividend.
The time to act is now.
We young people, especially young girls, want to be well trained. We want to take part when it comes to make decisions and to be involved in the development of our countries.
The time to act is now.
Thank you. I would now turn to Ms. Steneker and ask her my first question, which is, what is the demographic dividend? Why is it such a priority for development?
Thank you, Slavia. Before I go to your question, I see our executive director, Dr. Babatundo Shutimane, on the video. He died just 3 days ago, but I just would like to emphasize how much he was committed and passionate about the theme that we're discussing today, the demographic dividend, the need to invest in young people, especially young girls, defending their rights, improving their health. That was really what he all was about. To go to your question, we saw a little bit of it in the video. The demographic dividend is basically about, if you look at it at the household level, it's about this. When a household has fewer children that need to be taken care of, and a larger number of people who have jobs, decent jobs, that household can save and invest more money. When this happens at a larger scale, national economies and countries can benefit from a boost in economic growth. So the demographic dividend is basically economic growth that is achieved by having proportionally more people of working age and less dependence. The possibility of such a dividend occurring is when a country goes through an epidemiological and demographic transition in which reductions in mortality and fertility shift population structures. This sounds great, and it can be great, but there is a but. It is not an automatic process for countries to arrive at a situation where mortality levels are low and fertility is going down, or for countries to reap the dividends once they reach this stage. Both critically depend on the empowerment of the younger generations, their health, their education, and also, very importantly, their employment. The ability of young people to reach their potential, and girls in particular, and for workers to have fewer dependents as a result of access to voluntary family planning are prerequisites for a demographic dividend to be achieved. The countries with the greatest demographic advantages for development are those entering a period in which the working age population will have a low proportion of young dependents and, at the same time, the benefits of good health, quality education, and decent employment. And of course, not only these, but all countries stand to gain from investing in their population's rights and well-being. But one of the greatest opportunities we have to realize the world we want is aligning development and governance to capitalize on demographic trends and changing age structures. Defining the necessary policies and investment demands that governments throughout the world know the size, sex, location, and age distribution or age structure of their present and future populations, so that they can tailor investments for inclusive growth and leave no one behind. So to come back to your question, why is the demographic dividend a priority for development? because it is a one-time opportunity for a country to experience rapid economic growth and progress, and because it can speed up the achievement of several of the Sustainable Development Goals, including ending poverty in all its forms.
Thank you very much. My next question is for Mr. Lundberg. What kind of investments in young people are necessary to bring about the demographic dividend?
Thank you. And thank you all for being here and for inviting me to this panel. What's necessary is investments in young people to help them make the transition to adulthood successfully, right? To negotiate the complicated process of moving from early childhood, middle childhood, late childhood, through adolescence, which is incredibly fraught and complicated, to a productive and happy adulthood. That's really what we need to do. And this means that we need to address all these domains in which young people develop. Economic domains, political, social, familial, all the pressures that young people face when they're making this transition to adulthood. We have, if I can follow up a little bit on the demographic dividend, we have 1.8 billion young people on the planet today. And in the next 10 years, we're going to add roughly 1 billion young people to the labor market. That's 1 million a month in sub-Saharan Africa and 1 million a month in South Asia. Now, think about the pace of formal job creation and the opportunities that are currently available to these young people. We're not doing enough to prepare the world for them and prepare them for the world. So we need to invest comprehensively to give young people the opportunity to make this transition successfully, to be the agents, the drivers of their own development. And for that, we need to think about development not merely for young people, but with them. Right? If they're going to be the job creators and they're going to drive growth over the next 10, 20, 30 years, they have to be the ones in control. Today's 17-year-old is going to be 30 in 2030. That's when we're supposed to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Right? And today's 17-year-old is going to have children of her own. She's going to determine whether or not we achieve these goals, not us. Right? So we need to think comprehensively. We need to make the investments necessary to allow young people to be the agents and the drivers of development. We can talk specifically about investments in education, investments in health, access to health, making it possible for young people to make the choices themselves, to be in control of their own futures, their own bodies, their own education, their own skills development, creating the opportunities and the space for them to make jobs, to make self-employment, opening up the political process to allow them to express voice, to be engaged in governance. Right? We hear a lot these days about exclusion, political exclusion, exclusion of voice, right? The inability to express voice and to be engaged in the political process. So those are the investments we need to make. So it's an enormous and complicated and comprehensive set of investments that we need to make.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Muzu, could you follow up on this? You are an advocate for better access to family planning and sexual education for young people, especially girls in your country, in Ghana. From your point of view, why are these things important?
Okay, so for me, growing up as a young girl, issues of teenage pregnancy, unsafe abortion, gender-based violence were very normal in my community. So I lost friends along the way because at one point they got pregnant and they just had to drop out of school. Some of them died from unsafe abortions. Ask what made a difference for me. It was because I had access to information on my sexual and reproductive health. I had that information and I became empowered and I was able to take control over my sexual life. For young people like me who are sexually active within this young period, it is very, very essential to have access to information services. This is because when you have a young girl like me becomes empowered, she takes control over her life. She's able to make choices, and not just making choices, but informed and right choices. And that means a young girl like me who is informed decides to stay in school longer. And at the time when she's out of school, she's going to have a less number of children than she's likely to have if she wasn't. It also means that she now has control over the number of children to have, how to space them, and even when and how to take them to hospital. We have issues of children dying because their parents, they are teen mothers. There's another issue, it's very important because then we are taking pressure of government. Many of these teen girls find themselves having children when they are not ready, and that is what we will say unplanned and unwanted pregnancies, and their numbers are high. Every year, my country records 750 teen pregnancies. My friends were just a few of those numbers. I could have easily become a victim like them, but access to the information, the choice to make, and those were the choices I made, and that is why today I am here. So when we are talking about the demographic dividend, we've heard the technical knowledge. It's just about young people. Give us the information. Allow us. We make the choices. And just like myself, it comes automatically that you are able to make those right, informed choices, and then development continues.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mahiga, could you tell us, give us an example of how your government approaches family planning and the empowerment of young people?
Family planning in Tanzania is an integral part of the country's strategy to combat poverty, to eradicate ignorance, and to provide education. The combination of the demographic dividend must be seen against the backdrop of the democratic liability. By democratic liability, I mean the growing trends in Africa, in particular, including my country, of increasing numbers of young people because of the ignorance that parents have had and the lack of education and the sexual and the reproductive education that is needed to bring about understanding. But also in a country like Tanzania, apart from that, we are struggling against tradition and culture, where early marriages are still part of the culture, and the belief, especially among rural areas, that the more children you have, you are really getting an economic insurance. Now, these are the demographic liabilities. Now, when we have to overcome this and undertake a conscious effort to make sure that we stabilize the population and we inject a new culture among societies where family planning will be acceptable. First of all, it is important that the government provide adequate investment and it reconciles the health provisions that have given improvement to children growing longer and the education that their parents have. One of the reasons why we have a high population is that many mothers and children have had public health access. But this public health must go hand in hand with the educational and the public awareness of the need to space, because you may continue to have more and more children. In Tanzania, the multidimensional and comprehensive approach to family planning touches on the Ministry of Health, the civil society, and the private sector. What is needed is to make family planning, informed decision-making part of the educational curriculum and part of outreach activities by the government, by the civil society, through the media. And this combination of many stakeholders, of course our development partners, have to be marshaled and mobilized to respond to the conducive political environment and social environment that the government has created to reach out to mothers and young people in order to stabilize the population consistent with the development objectives to reduce poverty.
Thank you very much. I'd like us now to talk a little bit about what are the outstanding needs and necessary investments. And my first question is actually for Mr. Chikweko. 3/4 of Uganda's population is under 30. What are the biggest challenges in addressing their family planning needs, the needs of younger generations?
Yeah, in Uganda, actually the population, like most of the African countries, are generally young, with 77%, 78% below 30. We have a very young and vibrant population. But it has positives and it has challenges. Challenges in that the dependency ratio is very high, but positives also because they unveil unprecedented levels of labor. But this population cannot be productive unless we control the dependency burden, we facilitate manageable family sizes, and this can only be done if we invest in family planning, such that people can have manageable families, they can make savings that can be contributed to the economic development.
Could you give us some examples of the needs that young people in particular are facing in accessing family planning services from your experience in Uganda?
It's unfortunate that most of the facilities are intended for adults, but young people need use-friendly environments to access services. They need privacy. They need service providers who are not judgmental. But unfortunately, most of them are not yet trained and they have not been capacitated to reach there. And this is what young people, they need services. They need emergency contraception. They need information on HIV. They need care. And we have also vulnerable children who are living with HIV and they need support. And these are the services which young people. Amusu is a good example. She said she's what she is because she got the information. But there are many out there who are lacking the information.
Thank you very much, Sensor. And let's see. I'd like to ask you actually the same question about Tanzania. What would you describe as the outstanding needs when you think specifically about the services, the healthcare services that young people need?
I think, first of all, is to have an infrastructure that reaches out to a cross-section of the population in the urban areas as well as in the rural areas. Mm-hmm. And to extend primary health services through affordable means of access to Medicare. And in Tanzania, we have instituted a health insurance at all levels, including in the rural areas. There has to be a conscious effort of partnership with the private sector and non-government organizations, particularly the traditional missionaries we have been working with in the health sector. But above all, Tanzania has taken a proactive approach to the health sector by making sure that the budgetary allocations to the health sector are improved in a manner that would encompass not only provision of basic services at an affordable rate, but also the training of cadres and nurses that need to support that kind of infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So budgetary provisions, training, partnerships in the health sector are critical. I should mention at this juncture the partnership with international actors like the Global Fund, like certainly the governments like the EU, the United States, on the issues of HIV. Now, that comprehensive approach with many actors and stakeholders are important, while the government defines and gives the environment for conducive health approach and interventions.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Steneker, what about the global perspective from your view? UNFPA works in more than 150 countries, I understand. What are the gaps, the things that need to be done that you see most often?
Mm-hmm. Maybe first, it's good to be conscious of the fact that there is an enormous diversity among countries, with countries with regard to their age structures. They're probably more diverse now than ever before, and most likely than they will ever be in the future. Some countries, and of course most of these countries are in Africa, parts of Asia and Central America, have very young populations, and they're still early in the demographic transition. Others are on the brink of a possible demographic dividend, while still others are already grappling with a rapid population aging problem. But across the spectrum, age structure trends should guide the priority policies and investment needed for sustainable development, like expanding sexual and reproductive health and rights, modernizing the education system, advancing gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls, labor policies, workplace training, social protection systems, the works. But we use our worldwide presence and the scope and reach of our programs with women and young people to assist governments, and we try to carry out, to have a convening role for partners and influential actors that can help create the conditions for a demographic dividend. We advocate, we provide demographic intelligence, and we provide policy and programmatic support in the areas of sexual and reproductive health, including family planning, of course, the empowerment of women and girls, including eliminating harmful practices and gender-based violence. But the key to harnessing the demographic dividend is enabling young people and adolescent girls in particular, as several of the speakers have already pointed out, to enjoy their human rights and achieve their potential. And to make this happen, governments must recognize that human rights are the cornerstone of development. They should know the size, sex, and age structure of their populations, both now and in the future. And again, they really have to invest in young people.
Thank you. And I see that Mr. De Croo has joined us. Thank you very much. I know you're very busy today. We really appreciate your participation. May I ask you a question then, right away?
That's one of the reasons why I'm here.
Yeah. So Belgium, together with the Netherlands, Sweden, and Denmark, is one of the leading countries in She Decides, a new initiative that supports reproductive health for girls and women. Could you tell us what does the initiative aim to achieve, and how is it taken forward? I understand it's very new, so what is going on?
Definitely. As you said, She Decides was a reaction to the reinstauration of the Mexico City policy, and the idea was to not just react and cry scandal, as what has often been happening the last months, but to say, okay, look, any country is sovereign in making their own decisions, but we should then try to see what we can do to make sure that the effect on the terrain is as minimal as possible. And instead of just saying that we don't agree, let's see what we can do ourselves. And that we raised in total 181 million euros, which is quite good, which is not compensating the impact of the US administration decision, but at least it shows that around that topic, actually a lot of things are possible. We also saw that there was good private sector involvement. We had donations from private funds, actually US private funds, but then who chose not to disclose who they were, which is perfectly fine for us, of course. The whole question is, what do you do afterwards? Because this was a one-off event, at least up to now, based on, well, a public discussion, which was a bit of a hot discussion at that point. The question is, how do you take it further? I think that the idea of She Decides is a few elements. I think one of them is to influence policies. And influencing policies, you do that with raising awareness, with going in dialogue with other countries, and so on. And that we have done. Last month, we have done a She Decides field trip to Benin and to Senegal to have discussions on a political level, but also on the community level. And I have to say that it was really a positive experience to see that the discussion of sexual and reproductive health, which is not always an easy discussion, there's an incredible openness to discuss this. And to discuss this, for example, with religious leaders who will explain that they are open to the topic, but that maybe they would like to take another path of getting there, which is then maybe more related to the health of women, instead of emphasizing too much human rights, which is fine. I mean, we need to be flexible in addressing those topics. That, I think, is one element. Second element is I think, to continue to create a movement. We had 4 countries, as you said, that launched this, and tens of different other ones that joined us. Now, how do you make sure that this continues? We've created a small coordination unit with the Children's Investment Fund Foundation, which is based in London, to make sure that we have a way of functioning. I think now we have to broaden the group, because in one way, this could be seen as a somewhat Northern European initiative. It's the Netherlands, Belgium, Sweden, and Denmark. That's not the goal, because we saw that at the event itself, there was a very open discussion with countries from all over the world. So we're broadening the leadership, or the torch-bearer countries, if you can call it that way. And the intention is, at any big event, international event that you have, to try to organize something around the She Decides initiative. I think it has shown that we should stand up for our own opinions. And if you are very clear on what you want to achieve, and you bring it in a respectful way, but also in a way where you're not afraid to tackle difficult topics, actually a lot of people jump on board. And a lot of people jump on board with financial means, with which you can do a lot of things. So for me, it's an example of how to react to something that seems negative in the first place, but it actually has led to an increased awareness and an increased discussion around sexual and reproductive health.
Great, thank you very much. We now have a new thing here at EDD, which is having a quiz for you. So there are questions for the audience, which are on the EDD app. So if you go to the app, and then you go to Auditorium A1, you can see the questions, you can answer them, and then we can see on the screen how many of you have answered the questions correctly. I'll give you a minute just to look at your phones and find the questions. So our first question is, according to the UN World Population Prospects, how many young people aged 15 to 34 will enter the labor force per year until 2063? Please pick one of these answers. Okay, so most people think it's 12.1 million, and this indeed is the correct answer, right?
I'm afraid I rather gave that away. I apologize.
Yeah. Well, people were listening very carefully, we can see.
That's a good sign, people listen to you.
Yeah, it is a test, as you can see. Can we see our second question, please? According to the World Economic Forum, in which year could the gender gap close completely? And the gender gap this question is referring to is based on indicators of healthcare, pay, political empowerment, several indicators that the World Economic Forum is tracking how they differ between men and women. Which of these years do you think would be the year when the gender gap closes? Most people think it's 2186, and the correct answer indeed is that. So we have a very educated audience here on these topics. Let's go on to our third and last question. If we were to provide family planning to all women worldwide who want it, how many million unintended pregnancies could be avoided per year? And indeed, this is the correct answer. We have barely anyone who didn't guess that. Great. Now I'd like to take our first set of questions for our panelists. You can also submit them through the app. I will see them right here on my screen, but we can also do it the traditional way. You can just raise your hand, and then we can have a microphone brought to you. There is a question over there. Yes, please. Yes, hello.
Hi, thank you very much for the presentation. My name is Erica Boulanger from IPPF. The world is stumbling towards a contraceptive funding crisis, and according to a recent report, there simply isn't enough funding for contraceptive supplies to be able to meet the growing demand for family planning. And many of you on the panel talked about financing, which is such an important piece to be able to achieve the FP 2020 goals. So my question is, what innovative financing designs can we look to meet this contraceptive funding gap? And what role can civil society play, especially at the national level, to encourage governments to put their own money into the health and well-being of women and children? Thank you.
Thank you. Can we take another question, and then I can just give them to our panelists?
Not yet.
I can't see anyone. We can then maybe just have some of you answer. We did hear about the She Decides initiative, which is raising funding in a somewhat new way. Maybe on the civil society question, could I have you answer that? Just what is the role that civil society can play in having better funding for family planning and reproductive services?
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I should have been the one asking the question. We as civil society, I think the role we can play most is to amplify the voice. First, to governments to take up their responsibility to increase budgets for family planning. And we need to take advantage of, for example, the FP 2020 summit, where governments are put to task at the highest level. And we, the civil society, can add to that voice. But on the other hand, also we need to move the population into contributing to financing their FP needs. For example, through insurance, including family planning into the insurance schemes, and also other forms of financing. But the big question still remains, with the abrupt shift, with the coming of the Mexico City policy, what is the global community? Specifically, what specific steps is the global community moving in to address this in the short run, which is the biggest crisis now, because even governments, they need time to respond. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. De Croo, could you tell us how does Belgium prioritize funding for family planning? How does
family planning and empowerment of women and girls is one of the important topics that we have prioritized. We have also a plan on that and so on. I think this is the way most countries function. Then you look at the national level. There is always a discussion on what you would call the division of labor. Is okay. What topics are you basically working on? What's the expertise you have? What civil society organizations do you have that are working on that? But I would like to add now also what type of private sector engagement can you get going? And there you see that there is a window of opportunity today in opening up to the private sector. And I would often say to our Belgian private sector, look, I'm not your salesperson who's going to sell your services in the countries where we work. I mean, my first objective is a development objective. But of course, you can be a catalyst. I mean, if I'm going to focus on a certain domain in a certain country, well, why don't you add on to the things that we are doing, and we can increase our impact to a much higher magnitude. And I also say that to our civil society. We can be very complementary one to another. If we are doing investments in education, and there is an NGO which is good in sexual and reproductive health, well, why don't you use what we are doing on the educational side? Why don't you try to add on to that? They often also have a much finer understanding on the community level what the right way of doing is, how to pull in local NGOs and so on. I really think that, yes, the question was asked about funding. My feeling is that the funding is out there. The question is, which mechanism do you use to get the funding going? And getting the funding going in the private sector is a different thing than getting it going from, let's say, multilateral organizations and so on. But if you look for complementarity and work together, actually there's much more funding available than what we have seen up to now.
Yeah, could you add some?
I would like to add something to what Minister De Croo just said. And thank you for the person who brought up funding and financing, because that is obviously a key point. Of course, the United States pulling out of this sector of family planning, part of global health, is very worrisome, and it has a financial impact. But I would like to point out that family planning has been underfunded for a long time. So the United States decision is only one factor in the whole thing, but there is a problem there already. But I would also like to build on what Minister De Croo said, because it is to use donor funding, official development assistance, to catalyze private sector funding, but also domestic resources, because going towards the future, and some of the speakers mentioned it also, this is clearly where the money will need to come from. So whatever official development assistance there is now should really be used in very strategic ways to leverage domestic resources, to catalyze private sector resources, and we really need to be smart, because the funding aspect is key. Just to mention, and many of you will know that in London on 11 July, a family planning summit will be held, and that is one of the opportunities to look at those, how we need to go strategically forward.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions on the topics that we have discussed so far before we move on to our next topic? There will be a chance for you to ask more questions at the end.
It seems there's a question on the app.
We have actually already answered some of the questions here. So I will just, if we don't have any other questions. Oh, there is one here. Sorry, I can't see very well from here.
Yeah. Come on, grab the microphone.
Sorry, I'm just going to repeat a question that arrived on the app for Mrs. Tenneker about what can UNFPA do to support the demographic dividend. I know you answered partly, but maybe if you can just add, for apparently it was a question. Thank you.
Could you just answer very briefly what does the UNFPA does for the demographic dividend? We already discussed this at length, so if there is anything else that you'd like to add just for
I mean, our role is really an advocating and convening role. And I think this is a little bit also part of the legacy of Dr. Oshuti Main. He very much promoted this making use of demographic circumstances to really progress on development. So I think that is something that we have very clear, but also, for instance, the African Union has it as its theme this year. So it is clearly something that not only we, but many other people think is an important factor that provides a great opportunity for development.
Thank you. This actually is a nice segue into the next set of questions that I'd like to ask our panelists, and they are about the roles of different organizations and governments. What can they bring to the table, and what are the complementarities? We already started this discussion, so I'd like to first ask Mr. Mahiga, when you think of the EU-Africa cooperation, what do you think? What do you see in this particular area?
I think the new consensus that we heard about yesterday is a new paradigm shift on the part of the European Union, where they bring the developing countries, Africa in particular, not only as partners and equal partners, but with a prioritized focus on areas that are inclusive but not limited to, including the private sector. The European Union has to mobilize the private sector. That include the empowerment of women. Although this is on the agenda, but in real practice, it hasn't been mainstreamed in African policies. And in the partnership with the European Union, I think either in the form of development assistance or in the discourse and dialogue, this must continue. And the youth, I must say, is a serious problem because the African youth today has 4 dangerous characteristics. One is the numbers. The numbers are huge and increasing. And that population is healthy because it is getting medical health. Secondly, the youth is much more conscious, not on the numbers. They're more conscious because of the social media, because of the interaction and networking, and because, to some extent, it is disappointed, frustrated, and alienated by the elites who have produced them. And this is really very dangerous. It has to be addressed quickly. And thirdly, the youth has the ability to organize than it used to before. So I think it's very important that as much as Europe, the European Union in particular, is emphasizing on those 3 areas of private sector, women, and youth, government should engage and with the European Union. And we look forward to the summit that will take place later this year to develop agendas around these new thematic areas in order to enhance and bring to a higher level the partnership that has been so far. Dialogue is key, interaction is key, prioritization and a common understanding of what needs to be done has to be part of this discourse.
Thank you. And Mr. Muzu, we hear it's important to engage young people. What could you say about how we can engage them in the programs that affect them?
So I just want to build on from where he stopped, talking about engaging young people. We need that beneficial or mutually beneficial intergenerational dialogue. Young people, we ask for our rights, we ask for everything. But even personally, in my journey as a youth advocate and all of that, there were times I just got lost on the way. I didn't know what to do. Then I had to come back to the older generation. We need that dialogue. Most of the issues I talk about are challenges that have been with these people till now. They tried, perhaps, to solve them, but couldn't. And we are still trying to solve them. So I ask, what were the ways you used Why did it fail? And in this kind of interaction and dialogue, I find new ways that I think and I believe can be used to solve these same problems of teenage pregnancy, gender-based violence. So we need that intergenerational dialogue that puts both partners on the table. He talked about education. We need that all-encompassing education that challenges the youth to be innovative, that challenges the youth to change that mindset that perhaps we have carried till now, to see that we are this generation, we have that power to move the development agenda. We also need to move, and when still on the issue of education, then we cannot leave our sexual and reproductive health and rights. Most of the challenges we go through have their basics here. The challenges come from this. So if you tackle these challenges, if a young person can make the right and informed choices because they are informed, then they are empowered, they want to stay longer in school. Coming out of school, they are economically empowered, and then they contribute to the entire economy, and then we move on. So we need that, we need education, we need the dialogue, maybe we can call it mentoring, and then we need the support. It is there. Just guide us. We are not asking to leave us in the blue. We need that support to motivate us and tell us that indeed you can do it and you need to go for it.
Thank you. This is a great answer. Mr. Lundberg, just on the same topic about engaging young people, I know that you're involved in programs about youth empowerment. Could you share some perhaps best practice example of how young people could be engaged to become agents of change in their countries?
So, thank you. That's not so easy, right? Disempowering is easy. It's very easy to make someone frustrated and to close opportunities off. It's very easy to construct an environment in which young people don't have these opportunities. What we can do specifically on the ground to increase these opportunities and increase engagement and increase empowerment, that's really very difficult. So we work a lot these days with evidence. We're trying to build evidence of what works empirically on the ground. If you go, the World Bank has something called the Operations Portal, and that's publicly available. And you can go into there and you can type empowerment, and I did the other day, just to see how many programs the World Bank is doing that has something to do with empowerment. And it's 1,500 active programs that mention the word empowerment in there somewhere, right? How many of them are effective? I don't know. It's an enormous number of things, an enormous range of things, from formal schooling, trying to improve the quality and access to formal schooling, to post-schooling economic opportunities and skills development, to increasing the opportunity of young people to have an active voice in policy making. It's a very wide range of things. The number of programs that we can say truly, empirically, can show an impact on empowerment is really small. Now, all the things we've been talking about are right, but they're at sort of a high level. And I think in order to drive policy among our clients, among our partners, we really need to get down to the level of what works on the ground. And that's very hard to do. I'll just give you a couple of examples. We ran at the World Bank something called the Adolescent Girls Initiative for a number of years, and this was in 8 mostly post-conflict countries, trying to provide economic opportunities and skills for young women to enter the labor market successfully. And in 2 or 3 of the 8, it worked quite well. In the others, not so much, right? So this is really very difficult to do on the ground. When we talk about access to family planning and those sorts of resources and the capacity of young women to make decisions and be in control of their own lives, we have something called the Global Financing Facility for sexual and reproductive health, together with UN partners and others. And this is a very large fund trying to do this. And they are also trying to engender, maybe misuse a word, that kind of economic empowerment and empowerment on all levels on behalf of young women. But again, empirically, it's very, very difficult to do. I can talk about specific programs. There's one in Nigeria, a $300 million program in Nigeria, which is rather comprehensive and seems to be showing success. But it really is rather difficult to do. So again, I can give you specific examples, but I would say for all of us, we need to build the evidence of what works, and that's going to drive both institutions like mine, the donors, and our clients on the ground.
Thank you. And I'd like us to talk a little bit more about the role of civil society organizations. And my question is for Mr. Chikweko. In some countries, they're very important. I understand that in Uganda, your organization provides health services to more than 1.2 million people, you mentioned, a year, which is a huge number. What proportion of Uganda's population is served with, if Uganda's women who get family planning methods are served through your organization?
Yes, we can proudly say that we are the largest service civil society organization complementing with government in providing sexual and reproductive health services. 1.1 million women get served every year. This is close to 25% of the eligible women for services, and we cover slightly above 60% of the country in form of services, and this can be scaled up. But of course, we do this in partnership with a number of development partners, UNFPA and others. But I must say that this trend now is threatened with the commodity issue coming on board. The demand increases every year with the percentage of young people on board, and it's a challenge. It's a challenge.
Mr. Muzu, could you tell us a little bit more about the work of the organizations that you've been involved with? Just in general, give us some examples of how civil society organizations can provide some innovative or youth-friendly services.
So, first of all, I think I am a typical example of the role of CSO, or the complementing role that CSO is playing in all of this. Like I said earlier, what made a difference for me in that community where the pressure was so high was access to information. I had this information from CSO, or civil society, and that was Curious Minds and Dance for Life. These two civil societies invested in me, built my capacity, and I'm here today. So that is a typical example of the impact that they make. But we want to see, let's ask how many other young girls are benefiting like me. And so if we support CSO, it goes a long way. With Curious Minds, I do a lot of advocacy using media, targeting policy, government, and trying to influence policies that will go in favor of girls and issues of sexual and reproductive health. With Dance for Life, I do a very unique thing where I go into communities and I do consultations with young people, with young girls, on their realities. What are the real issues that are affecting them? And then with these strong stories, I'm able and more motivated to build strong advocacy messages. And you tell the policymakers that these are the issues on the ground. I could have easily been a victim. The pressure was so high in my community. But for this year, so how many of them, they are not in every part of the country. So government really needs to play that complementary role. And it has complemented where government could not reach, because we have our education systems not really equipped to provide some of this information. Some of us don't get it from schools, we don't get it from public health, because they are like us and they'll stigmatize us. But CSOs work with us on the ground, they understand us. And as an agent of change who has been empowered, I'm here and I speak to other young people. I empower them, I mentor them, they also become agents of change in our various communities, and we build that cycle of change. So civil society has to be supported more. They engage with some young people, we get the privilege, we also impact others, and the cycle of changing goes on in our communities, and we all play that complementary role, and we do it well.
You mentioned the media, and as a journalist, I'm actually very curious to hear about how we could help. Could you talk about this a little bit more?
Yes, so like I said earlier, one of the unique things we do at Curious Minds is we have the opportunity to use the national radio to promote issues of youth and women empowerment and all of that. So one of the programs, very practical, is what we call Gems of Our Time. And on this program, we talk about very real issues that are affecting young people. It is interesting to know that whilst talking on this, we open phone lines where people can call. And then right in the studio, you have young people calling. I have this challenge. I don't know who to talk to. I don't know where to go. And we start providing solutions right from the studio. We leave the studio and the calls keep coming. And for some of these young people who don't have information, they can do anything. They are desperate. Society is ready to stigmatize them, to pounce on them for doing what society seems as bad. So then we are able to connect them to where they can access services, where they can access information, and then we bridge that gap. So that is one of the very practical ways, involving young people. Sometimes you talk and then young people feel connected. They know that someone is there who understands the issues I'm going through. A peer like me, a young person like me is not ready to judge me. And they will come to us and we'll direct them, and then we are making the impact. Another one is prioritizing content on sexual and reproductive health. From my part of the country, I would say that content on sexual and reproductive health has not really been prioritized. It is not at the topmost list. It is down there. Perhaps, unfortunately, by the time you get there, people might have lost interest. We should put it topmost on the list. And while we do this, we should separate the messages. We should disaggregate information. We should know what we are telling adolescent girls. We should know what we are telling, what we want to give to persons with disabilities. We should know what we want to give to persons with in rural areas, because these are different groups of people with different needs. If we clump all of them and provide the content, yes, everyone gets choked and we don't know what is going for who. But we disaggregate this and we prioritize that content, and everyone is able to tap what is rightfully theirs, and then we move on. So we should prioritize content. We should involve young people in the program, and when it comes to media and when it comes to content, we should add them. And I think that these are very, very practical and innovative ways that we can use. Media is a very powerful tool. It does a lot of things. It reaches a lot of people. And we should also mix media. There are young people in my country who do not have access to internet, who do not have access to electricity. So if I go put all information about sexual and reproductive health on the net, I have left them out. But these people have radio sets because it is the cheapest form of media tool they can hold. So if I come on radio and I speak, they get their part. For young people in urban areas like myself, if I put it on Facebook, I know, yes, they are there. But for that rural person, it is that little radio they have. It is that TV set that they have. So we spread the content around. We involve the young person. We separate the messages. And I think I believe we are really, really good to go.
Thank you. That's a very comprehensive answer, and I completely agree with the audience in applauding you for this. Could you add a little bit more about the partnerships between the government and civil society organizations? Are there any challenges? Is there anything that countries can learn just from your experience of how they can complement each other rather than work in parallel universes?
After listening to this young girl here, I am even more convinced in what I believe, that there has to be 3 approaches to empowering the young people. The first one is to recognize them. And by recognizing them is to listen to them. Let them define their narrative, what their concerns are. And that will define them and help us as governments and institutions to understand it. So recognition emanating from their own narrative and who they are, using the media, their concerns, we must be open-minded. Secondly, is participation. Once you recognize their concerns and rights, you have to create an opportunity for them to participate. In other words, you are saying empowerment. Participate in what? Participate in decision-making. Participate in wealth generation. Give them loans. Participate in creative activities and opportunities. Let us go beyond the old paradigm that we shall do for them. By giving them the opportunity to participate, they become equal partners with a voice with government and engagement in skills, in decision-making, in economic participation to avoid marginalization. The third is to invest. It's the long-term investment in the young people, to give them hope, to give them expectations. Whether you are going to have an industrial strategy for employment creation, whether you are going to have opportunities emanating from the international community partnership. So investing in the youth with their energy and their creativity, it will not necessitate them to cross the Mediterranean. It will not encourage them to go in the streets where the terrorists are inviting them to undertake. It will not enable them to participate in non-caring of the environment. So investing in the youth is creating skills and investing in employment opportunities, both by government and the private sector. And also, after they have participated as political activists and really participating as a constituencies to inform the government, these three approaches should really make a difference. Recognize, let them participate, invest in them. Otherwise, the meeting place will be in the streets. We don't want that to happen. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great answer. We are nearing the end of our session. I'd like to open the floor for questions on this last part of our discussion. I do have a couple of questions myself, but I'd also like to give you an opportunity to ask yours. Yes, we have one right here in the middle.
Hi, I'm Emily Peters. I work for the Reproductive Health Supplies Coalition. We're an international coalition of 400 organizations working to increase access to contraceptives for all women around the world. I just wanted to raise an issue. What we see in the work that we do is looking at the supply chain of the products. The biggest problem is probably that last mile, that part where we want to get the product into the hand of the women who needs it. And for young people, this last mile is even longer, because when it comes to out-of-pocket payments, it's more difficult for them to do it. When it comes to transportation, to get to a health institution, it's more difficult. When it comes to policy barriers, consent laws, there's lots of things that young people face that are even more difficult than older people. And I have the feeling that all of you, all in your own role that you're here today, you can all play a very big role in that last mile and making it shorter for young people. And I'm a little bit afraid that if we only talk about informing young people and making them participate, we'll probably not get that part shorter. So I was really interested to know if you have some concrete ideas on how we could make that shorter. Thank you.
Would you like to volunteer? Yeah.
Rapidly, maybe not exactly on the... Is the microphone working? Yes. Not exactly on the physical provisioning, as you call it, but I think that you need to find the right ways of addressing a young population. Too often, I think what we've seen is a classical approach. We make leaflets, we make kind of institutionalized things. That doesn't work. What works very well is to have someone of their age group talk to them. And for example, social media is a very easy thing to do. It's a project we're doing with UNFPA in Burkina Faso, which is basically using telephone systems, SMS systems, social media for young people to talk with other young people about sexual and reproductive health. And it works actually quite well. The second example is in Benin. It might seem really, really trivial. This was just an automated calling system where you can call and just push numbers for different topics. Now, when they explained it to me, I thought, how effective is this going to be? It's actually very, very effective. because people can call at any moment, and especially they can call without being judged. And it's a really important thing. Very often people have fear to be judged with certain questions that they have. And when it is an automated system, actually the threshold is going down dramatically. Now, that is not a direct answer to your question on how you do the provisioning, but maybe we need to use that kind of thinking in provisioning to a young population. Maybe we need to use methods which are a bit unorthodox methods, but which lower the thresholds that you cited.
If I can address this, we've actually been talking about this recently, even over the past couple of days. So think about a product that is available in every village. What's already there? And I don't mean to endorse by mentioning them, but just by example, Coca-Cola is everywhere, right? So I think we need to innovate in the way we deliver services to people in hard-to-reach areas, that last mile that's so difficult and so expensive to cover. There are innovators, young people, young social entrepreneurs who are taking advantage of, who are creating and taking advantage of these opportunities to deliver services like this. So working, for instance, with the Coca-Cola supply chain, right? They manage the cold chain, they manage the transport, they manage all of this stuff extremely well. And I think we can take advantage of the things that already exist and the innovation and the dynamism that already is out there to deliver the services to the people who need it most effectively. I think the solutions are out there. I think we just need to be a little bit more creative and open-minded about whom we speak to and with whom we engage.
Would you be able to add something on this last mile question, whether this is a challenge, particularly on the delivery of the commodities and the payment by young people, whether this is one of the main challenges as opposed to information?
Yeah, I think the power of the youth and their ubiquitous presence among us has not been fully understood. But also the creativity, the innovation, the entrepreneurship in these young people has not been properly mobilized and channeled in the right directions. So if they are present among us, like the commodities, I think we should redefine their roles and their relationships with us. But also, I think there is a great opportunity to change the thinking. If that thinking begins here at the European Union through that consensus, it should go to the United Nations Forum. Really, the United Nations already created a special attention and the institutional related to accommodate the youth. It should be brought to the World Economic Forum to make it really the agenda of today and of the future. And I believe that the youth is not permanent. The youth is a transition. Because the youth of today are the leaders of tomorrow, but there are other young people who are coming. The phenomenon of a transitional commodity, I think, has not been fully understood. And the potential that the young people in their creative years can bring and add value to our societies has not been fully understood. And I think that is where the value of this kind of dialogue and discussion with them, among ourselves, in our governments and the international level will move us a great deal. Just to remember how we started this unfinished agenda of women empowerment. Since Beijing, we are still struggling, but it is on the agenda. And we are discovering ways and means every time we discuss and elevate it on the agenda. We should do the same with the youth agenda and bring it to the appropriate platforms and discussions and make it a popular, acceptable phenomena that we have to reckon with, rather than shy away from or neglect them or sweep them under the carpet. I think this is the time, and we must live up to this challenge and responsibility as governments, as international organizations, and the media has a particular role, really to help in redefining this new agenda and this new paradigm and educating the general public and making government more accountable and more responsible and more responsive to the needs and the agenda of the young people. Thank you.
Thank you. We have time for perhaps another question right here, in the front. I'll just take a couple of questions and then we'll have our panelists answer them. Yeah, please go ahead.
Hello, my name is Elena Vilar from DEFCO. The Minister of Tanzania mentioned that family planning goes against our culture. I would like, if it's possible, to elaborate a bit further how to deal with cultural values, religious beliefs, how the role of the education system can play on that. And also, I think an important aspect, and has not been mentioned so far that much, is the role of men and boys also, how to get them involved. I mean, empowerment of women is definitely a step, but boys and men should be also involved.
Thank you. Let's take another question very quickly.
Yes, very quickly. I'm Fraser Goodwin from the Save the Children EU office. The No One Left Behind universal agenda of the SDGs requires that we reach everybody. We reach everybody who currently is excluded. So to do that, we need to break down discriminatory barriers. And I haven't heard anything really about tackling discrimination and explicit exclusion yet. So I'd just like to hear some thoughts and comments on that.
And one question here. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Angel Labar from DSW, and my question goes in the same direction. We have heard how important is access to information for young people, especially for young women, but also for young boys. So how can we foster really the comprehensive sexuality education and make up the linkages between the education sector and the health sector?
And last question here.
Thanks. I'm Inga Breeze from Care International. We've heard quite a bit about reaching youth directly and using their narrative, and then also reaching out to governments and ensuring you have the infrastructure in place. But where I would like to hear a bit more from the panel is about how to reach the middlemen, like religious leaders that Mr. De Croo mentioned, but there's also the health service providers, etc. Could the panel share some examples of where it worked at scale to actually work with these middlemen? Thank you.
Thank you. I actually think they're all in the same vein, so I'd like you to just take a quick stab at the question. So how do we address the cultural barriers, discrimination of some groups, and the links between healthcare and education? So how do we deliver information and how do we change the hearts and minds?
I think the cultural dimension is something we have to reckon with. But the good news about retrogressive culture is that it is dying very hard. In Tanzania, for example, early marriages is out. Genital mutilation is something we are discussing. And the cultural dimensions that sometimes we are associated with religion are also being seen more realistically. Whether it is on the issue of family planning, what it means, and what religious concerns through UNFPA, very creative policies, we are addressing these cultural issues. I may also use this opportunity in Tanzania. We had the challenge of albinism. It was a cultural thing. And the misguided cultural understanding and misinterpretation of this group of people in society has to be combated, but there has to be a conscious political decision in order to address these cultural constraints and drawbacks. Probably this young lady has something to add. Yeah. I think on the issue of education, certainly we need to revamp And on the agenda of many developing countries, education has received its place, but health has not yet received its place. And in the package of health, there are all these other issues: family planning, empowerment, sexual reproductive rights, and all this. Health and education must have parity in terms of policy and commitment to this. Education is doing very well. Health is not. Let's work together to elevate it.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I'm afraid we're out of time, but you're welcome to approach our panelists afterwards just to have a chat with them about any questions that you have. You already know what they do. So just to wrap up this session, I just have to state the title of the session again for the record. It is Key Solutions for Development, Youth Empowerment, and Family Planning. So what we heard from our panelists today is that young people are a huge increasing and healthy population, which we can either it can become a demographic liability, or it can become a demographic dividend, which contributes to economic growth and development of a country. So if we want to go the second round, the investments that are needed are empowering young people to make right decisions for themselves. That includes family planning, having children at the right time and the right number of children that they want. How to do this? Youth-friendly programs in health facilities, sexual education, which is integrated in the educational system, and partnerships with the private sector and civil society, which all have something unique to bring to the table. We also heard about the role of the media in how young people can be reached. They're increasingly connected and should be brought into the dialogue. Their voices should be heard. They should be partners around the table when programs for them are being designed. Lastly, there are challenges. There are cultural barriers that are still being addressed. We heard many encouraging messages from our panelists today on how some of these issues should be tackled and how we can go forward to turning this huge and potential into a demographic dividend rather than a demographic liability. Thank you very much for being with us today. I'd like to thank our panelists, and if you have any questions for them, do feel free to approach them afterwards.